Life in 1975. When music was real and summers felt endless, close your eyes for a moment and think back. Think back to a time when the world moved slower, when summer days stretched on forever, and when music wasn't something you streamed, it was something you felt. The year was 1975, and if you were there, you remember. You remember in your bones. The morning ritual. Let's start with how the day began. You'd wake up to the sound of your mother in the kitchen, maybe the coffee percolator making that familiar burbling sound, no digital alarms shrieking at you, just the natural light coming through curtains that your mom made herself, or maybe the sound of your father's radio playing the morning news, AM radio, of course. Everyone listened to AM radio in 1975. You'd stumble to the bathroom, and there on the counter was that avocado green or harvest gold sink that every house seemed to have. Those colors were everywhere in 75, on appliances, on kitchen counters, even on your neighbor's refrigerator. We thought we were so modern back then. And you know what? We were. Breakfast meant sitting down together, not grabbing something and running out the door while staring at a phone. You sat at the table, maybe it was a Formica table with chrome legs, and you ate. Captain Crunch had just introduced the Crunchberry Beast character. Count Chocula was still relatively new and exciting. Or maybe your house was more traditional. Eggs, bacon, toast with real butter. The newspaper was spread across the table, and your dad was reading about President Ford, who'd only been in office since August of the previous year after Nixon's resignation. A world without the internet. Here's something the younger generation will never understand. In 1975, if you wanted to know something, you had to find out. You couldn't just pull out a device and Google it. You had to go to the library and look it up in an encyclopedia. You had to ask someone who might know. You had to wait for the answer. And that wasn't frustrating. It was just life. In fact, there was something magical about not knowing everything instantly. When you finally found the answer to something you've been wondering about for weeks, it meant something. You remembered it. If you wanted to meet up with friends, you had to make plans, real plans. You'd call their house on the rotary phone, and yes, you had to actually dial it, watching that dial spin back each time. If they weren't home, you didn't leave a text. You either left a message with their mom, or you'd try again later. And when you made plans to meet at the park at 3 o'clock, you showed up at 3 o'clock because there was no way to send a running late text. But let's talk about what really made 1975 special. The music. Dear God, the music. Turn on your radio in 1975, and you might hear Elton John singing Philadelphia Freedom or Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Both were massive hits that year. Elton was at the absolute peak of his powers, wearing those outrageous glasses and platform shoes, and nobody cared about anything except how incredible the music was. The Bee Gees had Jive Talkin' climbing the charts. This was before Saturday Night Fever turned them into disco royalty. This was still that transitional period where their sound was evolving, getting funkier, but you could still hear their earlier influences. Led Zeppelin released Physical Graffiti in February of 75, a double album, 15 tracks of pure genius. Kashmir, Houses of the Holy, Trampled Underfoot. These weren't just songs, they were journeys. You'd put that vinyl on your turntable and you'd listen to the whole album. You didn't skip tracks. You couldn't easily anyway. You experienced the album as the artists intended. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here came out that September. If you were lucky enough to be a teenager in 1975, you might remember lying on your bedroom floor, headphones on, listening to that album from start to finish, staring at the ceiling and feeling like the music was reaching into your soul. Shine On You Crazy Diamond wasn't just a song, it was a meditation, a prayer, a conversation with the universe. Earth, Wind, and Fire had Shining Star. The Carpenters were singing Only Yesterday. David Bowie released Young Americans, and Fame, yes, Fame, co-written with John Lennon, hit number 1 that year. KC and the Sunshine Band had everyone dancing to Get Down Tonight, and that's the way I like it. And here's the thing about music in 1975. You didn't have unlimited choice. You had what was on the radio, what you could afford to buy on vinyl, and what your friends would let you borrow. But that limitation made every album precious. When you saved up your allowance or your paycheck from your after-school job and bought a new record, it was an event. You'd rush home, carefully remove the shrink wrap, pull out that vinyl, and admire the album art while the first track played. Speaking of vinyl, let's spend a moment there, because if you weren't there, you can't fully understand what we lost when music went digital. First, there was the weight of it. That 12-inch square of cardboard with the vinyl inside, it had substance. The album art was large enough to actually see, to study, to appreciate as art. You'd open up Led Zeppelin physical graffiti and see that die-cut cover with the building facade, the windows you could open. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here came shrink-wrapped and appeared to be on fire, a surreal image of two businessmen shaking hands, one of them burning. These weren't just covers, they were art installations you could hold in your hands. Then there was the ritual. You'd remove the vinyl from its inner sleeve, carefully, holding it by the edges. You'd examine it for scratches. You'd place it on the turntable, flip the power switch, and watch it start spinning. Then you'd lift the tone arm, gently, always gently, and lower the needle onto the outer edge. There'd be that moment of crackling anticipation, and then the music would start, and the sound. Yes, vinyl had pops and hisses, but it also had warmth. There was a richness to the sound that came through those speakers, whether you had a fancy stereo system or just a basic record player, that made you feel like the musicians were right there in the room with you. You'd flip the record at the halfway point, side A, then side B. Even that became part of the experience of the album. Artists knew where the side break would be, and they planned for it. It was like an intermission in a play. Summer days that never ended. Summer in 1975 was different. Maybe all childhood summers feel endless, but there was something special about that particular time. School let out in June, and you had 3 entire months stretching ahead of you. 3 months with no homework, no schedules, no obligations except maybe mowing the lawn or helping with chores. 3 months to just be a kid. You'd wake up whenever you woke up. No alarm needed. You'd pour yourself a bowl of cereal, watch some cartoons, maybe Scooby-Doo or The Bugs Bunny Show, and then you'd head outside. Outside. That's where you lived in the summer. You'd hop on your bike, probably a Schwinn Stingray with a banana seat and high handlebars, and you'd just ride. No helmet. Nobody wore helmets in 1975. You'd ride to your friend's house, knock on the door, and ask if they could come out and play. Their mom would say yes, and off you'd go. Maybe you'd ride to the local swimming pool. Public pools were the social hub of summer. You'd spend hours there, swimming, diving, playing Marco Polo, seeing who could hold their breath the longest underwater. The smell of chlorine and suntan lotion, Coppertone, probably, with that picture of the little girl and the dog pulling her bathing suit, that smell meant summer. Or maybe you'd head to the park for a pickup baseball game. Someone would bring a bat and ball, you'd choose teams, and you'd play until it got dark or until you were called home for dinner. No adult supervision necessary, no scheduled practices or expensive equipment. Just kids playing baseball because that's what you did. The ice cream truck would come around in the late afternoon, playing that tinkling music that you could hear from 3 blocks away. You'd run inside, beg your mom for 50 cents, and then run back out to catch the truck. Push-up pops, bomb pops, drumsticks, or those orange creamsicles that somehow tasted like summer itself. Television. 3 channels, and we were happy. Evening meant television, and television in 1975 was a completely different animal from what we have today. First of all, you had 3 channels. 4 if you counted PBS. That was it. ABC, NBC, and CBS. You didn't choose from thousands of options. You watched what was on, or you didn't watch anything. And you know what? We were fine with that. More than fine. Some of the greatest television ever made aired in 1975. Saturday nights meant The Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Bob Newhart Show. Both were in their prime. Mary Richards and her newsroom colleagues felt like family. Bob Newhart's deadpan delivery as a psychologist dealing with quirky patients was comedy perfection. All in the Family was still dominating the ratings. Norman Lear's groundbreaking sitcom had America talking about social issues, race, religion, politics, women's rights, through the lens of Archie Bunker and his family. It was controversial and hilarious and sometimes uncomfortable, and that's why it mattered. The Jeffersons had just premiered in January 75 as a spin-off of All in the Family. George and Wheezy Jefferson were moving on up, and America was moving right along with them. Sanford and Son had Red Fox making us laugh with his portrayal of Fred Sanford, the cantankerous junk dealer always clutching his chest and calling out to his deceased wife, "I'm coming to join ya, honey." On Saturday mornings, kids owned the television. Super Friends had just premiered the year before. Shazam and The Secrets of Isis were introducing children to superheroes. Land of the Lost had the Marshall family dealing with dinosaurs and sleestacks in a parallel universe that gave kids nightmares and fascination in equal measure. But here's the thing about television in 1975. It brought families together. When The Wonderful World of Disney came on Sunday nights, the whole family watched. When a special aired, maybe a Charlie Brown holiday special, or The Wizard of Oz, shown once a year, it was an event. Everyone you knew watched it, because everyone watched the same thing. On Monday at school or work, you could talk about what you'd seen because you'd all seen it together. And then there were movies. Oh, the movies of 1975. Jaws came out that June and changed everything. Steven Spielberg was just 27 years old, and he created the first summer blockbuster. People were terrified to go in the water that summer. The mechanical shark barely worked during filming, which forced Spielberg to be more creative, to suggest the terror rather than show it constantly. That constraint made the movie better, more frightening. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest premiered in November and would go on to sweep the Oscars. Jack Nicholson as Randall McMurphy, battling Nurse Ratched in that mental institution. It was powerful, heartbreaking, unforgettable. Rocky Horror Picture Show came out in September and initially flopped. Little did anyone know it would become the longest-running theatrical release in film history, with midnight showings starting a year later that would become a cultural phenomenon. But in 75, it was just this weird little movie that confused most people. The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Tommy, Shampoo, 3 Days of the Condor, 1975 was an incredible year for cinema. And going to the movies was special. You didn't have 1,000 movies at your fingertips at home. If you wanted to see a movie, you went to the theater. You stood in line, sometimes around the block for big releases like Jaws. You bought your ticket from a real person at the box office. You got popcorn in those red and white striped containers. You found your seat. And when the lights went down and the curtains opened, yes, theaters had curtains, you were transported. After the movies, maybe you'd stop at the corner store or the drugstore. These weren't big chain stores. They were local businesses where the owner knew your name. You'd walk in and there'd be that smell, a mixture of newsprint, candy, and that indefinable store smell. The wooden floors would creak under your feet. You'd head straight to the comic book rack, spinning it around to see what new issues had come in. In 1975, comic books cost 25 cents. A quarter. You could buy 4 comics for $1. Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Batman, Superman. These weren't collector's items sealed in plastic. These were reading material. You'd buy them, fold them up, stuff them in your back pocket, and read them until they fell apart. The store owner might let you read one while standing there, as long as you were careful with it. Try doing that in a store today. You'd also check out the candy selection. Marathon bars, those long, braided chocolate bars that seem to go on forever. Chico Sticks, Turkish Taffy, Bit-O Honey, Red Hots. Or maybe you'd get a bottle of soda from the cooler, real glass bottles that you could return for a 5-cent deposit. Pulling that cold bottle of Coca-Cola or Orange Crush out of the ice-cold water in that old cooler was pure satisfaction. Of course, 1975 wasn't all carefree and perfect. We were still dealing with the aftermath of the oil embargo. gas prices had skyrocketed to nearly 60 cents a gallon, which doesn't sound like much now, but it was shocking then. Some stations had run out of gas entirely the previous year, leading to those long lines of cars waiting to fill up. In response, the federal government had mandated a nationwide 55 miles per hour speed limit to save fuel. Your dad probably grumbled about it every time he got on the highway. Double nickel, they called it. Highway driving became a test of patience. Cars in 75 were big, real boats. Ford LTDS, Chevrolet Impalas, Buick LeSabre. These weren't efficient little vehicles. They got maybe 10 miles to the gallon if you were lucky, and they were built from steel and chrome and had enough room inside to fit your entire family comfortably. No seatbelt laws in most places yet. Kids would pile into the back of station wagons for road trips, climbing around freely while dad drove and mom navigated with an actual paper map. And let's talk about what we wore, because fashion in 1975 was something. Bell bottoms were the law of the land. The wider the flare, the better. Hip huggers that sat low on your hips, paired with those bells that covered your shoes. Maybe your jeans had embroidered flowers or peace signs on them. Platform shoes weren't just for rock stars. Everyone wore them, men and women. You'd see businessmen in three-piece suits with shirts that had collars so wide they looked like they could take flight. Leisure suits? Yes, leisure suits. Polyester suits in colors like powder blue, lime green, or burnt orange. They were supposed to be comfortable enough for leisure, but nice enough to wear out. They were neither, but everyone wore them anyway because it was 1975 and we thought we looked good. Women wore midi skirts and maxi dresses. Wrap dresses, made famous by Diane von Furstenberg, were everywhere. Halter tops, hot pants, go-go boots were still hanging on from the late 60s, though they were starting to fade. And hair. Oh, the hair. Men wore their hair long, down to their shoulders or longer. Sideburns were thick and descended past the ears. Mustaches were mandatory for half the male population. Women had Farrah Fawcett's feathered wings, though her poster wouldn't come out until 76. The style was already taking hold. Or they had long, straight hair parted down the middle. Big, round glasses with tinted lenses were everywhere. Looking back at photos from 1975, we might cringe a little. But at the time, we thought we were the height of fashion. And you know what? We were. That was the style. And we rocked it. By the end of 1975, America was gearing up for something big, the Bicentennial. The 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence was coming in July of 1976, and already in 75, the country was getting ready. Red, white, and blue were everywhere. Patriotic fervor was building. After the trauma of Vietnam, the Watergate scandal, and the uncertain economy, Americans were ready for something to celebrate. We wanted to feel good about our country again. In schools, teachers were already talking about the Bicentennial. History lessons focused on the Revolutionary War, the Founding Fathers, the birth of the nation. There was a sense of anticipation, of hope for the year to come. Technology, the cutting edge of 1975. Let's talk about what high tech meant in 1975, because it's fascinating to look back at what we considered advanced. The first personal computer was still a year away. The Altair 8800 had come out at the very end of 74, but it was for hardcore hobbyists. The Apple I wouldn't debut until 1976. In 1975, if you wanted to use a computer, you went to work or school where there might be a massive mainframe computer that took up an entire room. Calculators were just becoming affordable for regular people. Before that, if you needed to do complex math, you used a slide rule, or you did it by hand. The first truly affordable pocket calculators came out in the mid-70s, and they were revolutionary. Being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with the push of a button felt like living in the future. If you wanted to record something on TV, too bad. VCRs existed, but were incredibly expensive and rare. You watched a show when it aired, or you missed it. There were no reruns in the summer for many shows. They'd just show old episodes, or the network would put on different programming. Microwave ovens were just starting to appear in homes, though they were still expensive and somewhat mysterious. Most people didn't really know what to do with them beyond heating up water or reheating leftovers. A telephone was attached to the wall or sat on a table connected by a cord. Long distance calls were expensive. You watched the clock when calling relatives in other states. You might have one phone in the house, maybe two, if you were fancy. The idea that everyone, including children, would someday carry a phone in their pocket would have seemed absurd. There were also sounds in 1975 that you don't hear anymore. The click, click, click of a rotary phone dialing. The ding of a typewriter at the end of a line. The mechanical ker-chunk of a car door closing. Solid metal. Heavy. Substantial. The whoosh of the TV warming up when you turned it on. Those old tube televisions took a few seconds to come to life. Lawnmowers were loud, roaring beasts that you had to pull start with a cord. No electric mowers, no riding mowers for most people, just a push mower that you muscled across the yard while the smell of fresh cut grass filled the air. Speaking of smells, 1975 had distinctive smells that would instantly transport you back if you could smell them now. The oily smell of mimeograph fluid on fresh copies from the school office. The smoke from your father's cigarette everyone smoked in 75. Everywhere. In restaurants, in cars, in the living room while watching TV. The smell of your mother's Aquanet hairspray. Vinyl car interiors baking in the summer sun. The smell of developing Polaroid pictures. Because, yes, instant photography was the cutting edge. You'd take a picture, and the camera would spit out this square piece of film. You'd wave it around, whether that helped or not, and watch as the image slowly appeared. Magic. School, a different learning experience. School in 1975 was a different world. Teachers could discipline students more directly. The principal's office was a place of genuine fear. Your teacher might have a paddle hanging on the wall, not for decoration, but for actual use if you acted up. Some kids got sent to the corner to stand for misbehaving. These were accepted practices. You learned cursive writing because that's how adults wrote. You practiced your letters over and over until they were perfect. No one imagined a future where cursive would become obsolete, where people would type everything on keyboards and touchscreens. Math class meant showing your work. All of it. No calculators allowed. You had to know your times tables by heart. You did long division by hand. It was harder, maybe, but it also meant you understood the underlying concepts. The school library had card catalogs. Those beautiful wooden cabinets with tiny drawers filled with cards that told you where to find each book. You'd flip through the cards, write down the call number, and go hunt through the stacks for the book you needed. Research meant spending hours in the library, taking notes on index cards. Gym class meant actual physical activity. Dodgeball, kickball, rope climbing, those awful rope burns on your hands when you tried to climb all the way to the ceiling. The presidential physical fitness test pushed everyone to do pull-ups, sit-ups, and run the mile. And at the end of the day, you walked home, or rode your bike, or took the bus. Your mom wasn't waiting in a line of cars to pick you up. You were expected to get yourself home, and you did. Neighborhoods were different in 1975. People knew each other, really knew each other. Mrs. Johnson across the street knew all the kids in the neighborhood by name. She'd yell at you if you walked across her lawn, but she'd also give you cookies and lemonade on hot days. Mr. Martinez down the block would help jumpstart your dad's car when the battery died. The Hendersons would watch your house when your family went on vacation. Kids played outside in packs. You'd have kids from 3 or 4 different families playing together, and all the parents sort of collectively watched over everyone. If you did something wrong at Tommy's house, Tommy's mom would discipline you, and your parents would thank her for it. Summer evenings meant sitting on the front porch or stoop. Adults would chat with neighbors passing by. Kids would play until the streetlights came on. That was the universal signal that it was time to head home. Block parties were common. Someone would set up a grill, another family would bring a cooler full of drinks, and everyone would gather in the street to eat and talk and watch the kids play. No one worried about permits or liability. You just did it. The freedom we had. Here's something that's hard to explain to people who didn't live through it. The freedom children had in 1975 was extraordinary by today's standards. On a Saturday morning, you might leave your house at 9 in the morning and not come back until dinner time. Your parents didn't know exactly where you were. They didn't need to. You were somewhere in the neighborhood, probably with friends, and you'd come home when you were supposed to. You'd explore. You'd find a creek and follow it. You'd build a fort in the woods. You'd ride your bike to parts of town you'd never been to before. You'd have adventures. Real, unsupervised adventures. It wasn't that parents didn't care. They cared enormously. But there was a basic trust. Trust in their kids to be reasonably sensible. Trust in the community to watch out for children. Trust that the world wasn't quite as dangerous as we'd later come to believe it was. Were there dangers? Of course, bad things happen sometimes. But the prevailing philosophy was that children needed to learn independence, needed to take reasonable risks, needed to figure things out on their own. And for the most part, we did. The food, simple and satisfying. Food in 1975 was simpler. Not necessarily better or worse, but simpler. Dinner was meat, a starch, and a vegetable. Pot roast, meatloaf, fried chicken, pork chops, maybe spaghetti on Italian night, from a jar of ragu sauce probably. Hamburger helper was considered a convenient modern meal. TV dinners, those aluminum trays with separate compartments for the main course, vegetables, and dessert, were space-age convenience. Fast food was a treat, not a regular occurrence. Going to McDonald's was exciting. The menu was simple: hamburgers, cheeseburgers, fries, and shakes. The Big Mac had only been around since 1968, still relatively new. A hamburger cost about 30 cents. You could feed a family of 4 for under $5. Eating out at a sit-down restaurant was a special occasion. You'd get dressed up for it. Dad would wear a collared shirt, Mom would wear a dress, kids would be in their good clothes. You'd wait to be seated by a hostess, and a waitress would take your order and bring your food. You'd leave a tip, probably about 10%, not the 20% expected today. Snacks were simpler too. An apple, a banana, some crackers, and cheese. Maybe some Jiffy Pop popcorn. You'd put that aluminum pan on the stove and watch it expand into a giant silver dome as the popcorn popped. The smell would fill the kitchen, and everyone would gather around waiting for it to be ready. The end of a perfect day. As the day wound down, the pace slowed even more. After dinner, you might watch some TV as a family, or play a board game, Monopoly, Life, Clue, or Sorry. These games would go on for hours, with everyone gathered around the kitchen table or the coffee table in the living room. Dad might read the evening paper, Mom might work on a craft project, macrame was big in 75, those plant hangers made of knotted cord, or maybe she'd knit or do needlepoint while watching TV. As bedtime approached, you'd brush your teeth with close-up gel toothpaste or Crest. You'd put on your pajamas, maybe they had cowboys or superheroes on them if you were a kid, or maybe they were just regular cotton pajamas that had gotten soft from dozens of washings. If you were young, maybe your mom or dad would read you a story. Where the Wild Things Are, Charlotte's Web, Harriet the Spy, or The Chronicles of Narnia. Books were treasured, passed down, read over and over until the covers were worn and the pages were soft. Then lights out. Your bedroom was dark, really dark. The way rooms don't get dark anymore, with all our devices and streetlights and ambient light. You could hear the crickets outside, maybe a dog barking in the distance, the hum of a fan if it was summer, the radiator clanking if it was winter, and you'd fall asleep satisfied, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day much like this one. And that was okay. That was good. That was life. Now, I'm not going to tell you that everything was better in 1975. It wasn't. We've gained a lot since then. Medical advances, technology that's made many things easier and more convenient, progress on social issues that needed progress. But we've lost something too. We've lost that slower pace. We've lost the art of being bored and having to figure out what to do with ourselves. We've lost the experience of waiting for things and the satisfaction of finally getting them. We've lost the sense of community that came from everyone sharing the same limited experiences, watching the same TV shows, listening to the same radio stations, reading the same newspapers. We've lost some privacy too. In 1975, when you left your house, you were unreachable until you got home. There was something freeing about that. No one could call, text, or email you. You were just out in the world experiencing life without documenting it for social media. Music lost something when it became infinitely available. When you have every song ever recorded at your fingertips, each song becomes a little less special. In 1975, you had your albums, your radio, and that was it. But the music you did have, you really knew. You knew every word, every instrument, every nuance because you listened to it over and over. Perhaps what we miss most about 1975 is the element of surprise, of not knowing what was coming next. We didn't know that personal computers would revolutionize everything. We didn't know that we'd someday carry devices in our pockets that could access all human knowledge. We didn't know how the world would change. We just lived. We lived in the moment because that's all we could do. We couldn't capture every moment on camera. Film was expensive, and you had to finish the whole roll before you could develop it. So instead of photographing everything, we just experienced it. We stored memories in our minds instead of on hard drives. Let me paint you one more picture. One perfect summer evening in 1975. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The heat of the day is finally breaking, and a slight breeze is picking up. You're riding your bike home, maybe with a friend or two. You can hear someone's radio playing from an open window, Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell maybe, or One of These Nights by the Eagles. The smell of someone's barbecue drifts through the air. A sprinkler is going somewhere, creating a rainbow in the last rays of sunlight. You can hear kids playing in the distance, their voices carrying on the evening air. A screen door slams. You coast into your driveway, leave your bike on the lawn, no need to lock it up, and head inside. Your mom calls out to ask where you've been. Just riding around, you answer. She tells you to wash up for dinner. The TV is on in the living room. Your dad is in his recliner watching the news. Everything is ordinary. Everything is perfect. And that night, after dinner, maybe you'll go back outside and catch fireflies in a jar, watching them blink on and off. Or maybe you'll sit on the front step and just watch the world go by. The streetlights will come on, the stars will come out, and tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Why we remember 1975, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The music was real, recorded by real musicians playing real instruments. The friendships were real, formed by actually spending time together, not by clicking like on a photo. The experiences were real, lived in the moment, not viewed through a screen. We remember it because we were present. We were there. We couldn't be anywhere else, mentally or physically, so we were fully engaged in whatever we were doing. We remember it because life moved at a human pace, fast enough to be interesting, slow enough to be savored. We remember it because summers really did feel endless, because music really did sound better, because even though we didn't have much compared to what people have now, we had enough. We had what mattered: time, freedom, community, and those long, perfect days that seemed like they'd never end. If you lived through 1975, you're lucky. You experienced a time that can never come again. The world has moved on, changed in ways both wonderful and regrettable. But that year, that golden year when music was real and summers felt endless, that year is yours. It's locked in your memory, perfect and untouchable. When you hear Bohemian Rhapsody or Shining Star, you're transported back. When you smell fresh-cut grass or chlorine or your grandmother's perfume, you're there again. When you see an old photograph of yourself in bell-bottoms and platform shoes, you don't just see who you were. You remember who you felt like, what you dreamed about, What mattered to you? Those memories are precious. They're a gift from your younger self to who you are now. They remind you of a time when life was simpler, when happiness didn't require the latest device or the most impressive vacation. Happiness was a bicycle, a radio, and friends to share it with. It was a summer day with nothing scheduled and nowhere you had to be. Hold on to those memories. Share them with people who understand, who were there, who remember. And when someone younger asks you what it was like, tell them. Tell them about the music, the freedom, the sense of community. Tell them about rotary phones and vinyl records and how you had to actually get up to change the TV channel. They might not fully understand. How could they? They didn't live it. But maybe, just maybe, you'll help them see that there was something special about that time. Something worth remembering. Something worth missing. 1975. The year music was real. The year summers felt endless. The year we lived in the moment. Because that's all we had. And you know what? It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.